Hey there, everybody. Harold, Joan, Ted, hi. All right, you guys are the early birds, not just on time, but actually early. Thank you. Yeah, today we're gonna talk about meeting your customer cybersecurity demands, and I want to just give a couple more minutes for folks who are maybe rushing from one meeting to the next. Not that I know what that's like. And oh, Ted says he can't unmute. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that in a minute. We got you guys on lockdown. Sorry. But yeah, so we're gonna have a couple of Q&A sessions today, and when those come up, we ideally will be able to unmute you and let you ask any questions that you have. But we're gonna cover the protocol for that. So I have two people with me today. Let me do an introduction. So co-presenter is Glen Sorensen. Hey, Glen.
Ooh.
So Glen, you're not on mute. So why don't you give everybody a quick who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I've been in IT and security for 15 plus years or so at this point. Have done a little bit of everything from consulting, security operations, audit, and compliance. So seen a little bit of everything, done a little bit of everything, been burned by a little bit of everything. So I bring that experience.
Scars. You have scars. Scars have stories. And then Melinda Miller's here. Hey, Melinda, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Melinda. I'm really excited to be here with you guys. I am here to help make sure all of your questions get answered throughout the presentations. So at any time, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in our chat room, and I will make sure that we get a chance to get through all of the questions. If we have lots of time, I will let you guys unmute yourself so you can ask them directly.
Excellent. Okay, cool. All right. I don't want to wait much longer. We'll just let people join as they can. Appreciate your patience. So again, we're going to talk about meeting customer cybersecurity demands. I'm talking to you today as somebody who provides virtual chief information security officer services for a large number of companies, along with my team. So Glen's on my team, Melinda's on my team, we have other people on the team. And I'm going to show you some examples today of some of the queries and some of the work that we've done for folks, for our customers who are trying to land their own customers who have a lot of demands. So we're going to share that with you today. And I hope you're going to get a lot out of it. I hope this is going to be really helpful to you. So let's start by taking a look at this redacted email here that I received. So in my recent inflection point that I sent to you a few days ago, I told you about Jeff. So Jeff's the CEO of a small company, and he reached out to me, and so I took his email and I scrubbed some information off of it, and you can take a look here, right? So this is real world, okay? And what is he saying to me? He's like, oh, I really need to fix my security issues, but my team is small, I have a limited budget, and I just feel like these requests are just gonna strangle me. And so who is Jeff? Well, he's the CEO of a video marketing company. He's really good at what he does, but he doesn't know anything about cybersecurity. And he'd been trying for months to actually deal with this on his own. He has AWS as a customer. He's got other large companies as customers, Microsoft, Salesforce, and each one of these companies has its own vendor risk management program. And so he's just constantly getting barraged by his customers about cybersecurity. So I mean, it's a little unfair, right? Because you got David on one side with a slingshot, right? you know, really perky, you know, person who wants to get things done. And then you got Goliath sitting on the other side, right? I mean, AWS is a $40 billion company. Their cybersecurity team is bigger than Jeff's entire company, right? So just it's a really unfair matchup. But you can see what they wrote there, right? So, hey, Jeff, our new VP is eager to submit all vendors through our external party review process, and it will likely take weeks. And I think that's kind of what put Jeff over the edge, right? He's just thinking, weeks, oh my goodness. I mean, even if he ends up coming through this okay, the idea of going through it for weeks and being you know, barraged with questions about things he doesn't understand, it just distracts, right? It just takes away from his ability to serve his customers and make them happy. And he does have a lot of really happy customers. It's just that none of them actually work in the vendor management team or the cybersecurity team, right? So so you've kind of got this triangle of relationships going on here. So yeah, he's concerned about his company's future. He doesn't want to lose control. And I mean, who could blame him? So anyway, I've known Jeff for several years, and I knew that this was going on, but finally he said, all right, I'm raising the flag here. I'm going to need help. So one of the things I want to share with you today is just how Jeff dealt with his situation. He's in a much better place now. And of course, we're going to answer your questions, and we're going to leave as much time as possible to do that. And then I'm also going to give you one practical tool. So we've got a toolbox of things that we use for to help people like Jeff. I'm going to give you one of our tools, and with my blessing, so that you know, you can use it right away if you find it useful. You know, I want you to have it. Okay, so just as a reminder, we've got Melinda here. So as you come up with questions, please put them in the chat box, and Melinda will keep track of that. If you have any logistics issues at all, you know, put any issues that you have in the chat box, and then Melinda's going to keep an eye on the waiting room. So if anybody else shows up, we'll let them right in. Okay, so without any further ado, what I want to do is we're going to do a joint presentation. So Glen's going to go first, and what he's going to talk with you about is a very specific example of what Jeff's going through. So we're going to look at Microsoft Supplier Security and Privacy Assurance Program, which I don't want to say again. So I'm just going to say SSPA. And Glen is going to share with you, you know, what that program is like at a high level, and how he has guided other people through that program and through that compliance process. So, Glen, are you ready? If you are, I'll just stop sharing so that you can take over.
I can share. Okay. Let's
Great.
give it a go here. See if I can share my other screen here. All right. Is everybody seeing me there?
Yep, looks good.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the SSPA, and I don't really want to say the full acronym there any more than I have to, so I will follow Kip's lead there. I do want to bring a few definitions to our attention here up front, and that is the data protection requirements, or DPR, which is the set of Microsoft security and privacy requirements that their suppliers must adhere to. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that and how that adherence works as well. But also there's this term of data processing approvals or profile approvals that comes up repeatedly and is a little bit of a question mark from folks. So what those are really the categories of data that Microsoft suppliers can handle. They can sign up to handle certain categories, which are their profile approvals. And that also determines the level of assurance required for Microsoft by their supplier. And we'll talk in more detail about that as well. So what is the SSPA? Since I don't want to say the whole word there again, or the whole phrase again. It sets the privacy and security requirements in order to handle Microsoft personal or sensitive data, and there are a couple different categories of that. All the suppliers that process personal data or Microsoft confidential data must enroll in the SSPA, and it's there's a portal you get. And there are a couple of different statuses you can have on there, but ultimately you want to be green status at the end so you can do whatever it is you are intending to do for Microsoft. And the SSPA uses the DPR, the data protection requirements, as a baseline for their security and privacy. So this comes straight from Microsoft documentation, but I want to talk about it a little bit. Once you enroll and have access to the portal, then you can set your profile approvals. This is ultimately what your company wants to do for Microsoft. Then based on those profile approvals, you take action, and that is compliance with the DPR. If you're processing payment cards, then PCI DSS. If you're a SaaS provider, so cloud service provider, that creates a little bit different category. And then, an independent assessment, which may be required depending. And then once those pieces are done, you submit them back, and then Microsoft reviews them. And if all is well, then you're set back to green, and you can get paid for doing what you intend to do with Microsoft. And the requirements there aren't that much different, but between a new supplier and a kind of a supplier renewal, except that there becomes there's a 90-day window in there from the annual mark to reaffirming your profiles, taking that action, being reviewed, and being set back to green. So this is just kind of another way of looking at the same thing, but what we really want to focus on are number 2 and number 3 here. Profile approvals and the action you should take. So these are the profile approvals, and these are the 6 categories that they've got. And you'll notice that there is scope of data, the processing location of the data, the role, whether you process payment cards, whether you're a SaaS provider, and whether you use subcontractors, all of which Microsoft factors into their risk categories here. This is a subset of Microsoft's examples of the data type, of the personal data types. I'll give you just a second to read through those. Again, this is just some. They've got a couple more tables like this in their documentation that talks about the types of data that may fall into this category. But obviously, very personal data or customer data can include location data, that sort of thing. I'll give you just a minute to look through that, and then I'll move on. Okay. Microsoft confidential data. So they have highly confidential, which tends to be pre-release or technical documentation, stuff that's extremely sensitive to Microsoft. And then confidential, which is a little bit better known, but may include some pre-release materials, but typically for more well-known activities and products that they've got. Okay, so I mentioned before that suppliers choose the scope and their profile approvals. Sort of. If you're doing business with Microsoft, if Microsoft wants to sign you up to do something, it's probably fairly specific in terms of what you're doing. So you may not really have much of a choice. You may have to submit a certain level of profile approval in order to do the work that you want to do or that you're intending to do with Microsoft. So, I mean, that also means you get to choose which level of rigor, pain, and assurance you provide, right? Again, just sort of. What I mean by that is you still have to adhere to the DPR. It's whether or not you can self-attest or whether you have to have an independent assessment or some other form of certification that they accept, and which we'll talk about a little bit more. This is the same slide as before, but just to remind you, these are the profile approvals that you can sign up for. And this is a subset of the requirements that go with them. So this is just an example, but it's the first couple of items that Microsoft has in their documentation. And if you look in that the kind of middle column, or the third column, I guess, it's the assurance requirements. And the first 2 are just self-attestation to compliance for the DPR. So that's basically you saying, yes, we're doing this, and you can be on the hook if you're wrong about that. But the last column there, the fourth column in item 3 there, there's the independent assurance options that go with that. So the third column, it says you have to do the self-attestation to the DPR and an independent assurance of compliance. And then the fourth column is your independent assurance options. So you have an independent assessor, an auditor, come in and do an assessment against the DPR. Or in this case, you can submit an ISO 27001 cert, which is its own set of rigorous activities. Or in this case, you can also submit a SOC 2 with security trust criteria. But of special note, this option retires at the end of this year. So that then leaves independent assessment or ISO 27001. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the data protection requirements. There are 53 items on the list. About half of them are privacy related and half of them are cybersecurity related. Again, what you have to do is based on profile approvals, sort of. And there are options, sort of. We talked about the self-attestation versus the independent verification. The one that didn't show up in our example there was the ISO 27700 or 27701 for privacy, in addition to the 27001 for security. Most small and mid-sized businesses are not going to have those. They're a level of effort to get there. You end up employing people full-time to manage those types of kind of ongoing assessments that are required for ongoing certification. Back to the idea that, you're just a small business or maybe a mid-sized business, and this is a big hill to climb. It's not impossible. It's a lift and can be a big lift depending, but let's talk about that a little bit. What does this all mean? Be clear of your actual requirements. What sort of data are you actually going to process? One of the things that I found, and I'll talk a little bit about later too, is sometimes the questionnaires or the means of Microsoft determining this category are kind of inflexible or seem to be that way, and a little bit kind of sterile and absent of context in their approach. But if you're aware of what you're doing, you have some options in terms of how you can move what you're doing around a little bit that might put you in a better place or an easier to comply place. And also be aware of what your business goals are and how they might change. If the data scope that you intend to handle changes, or you plan on having that change in the future, your requirements may well change. By the same token, this program through Microsoft changes somewhat regularly and has changed a number of times in years. So you could be doing the same thing that you've always done, and your scope might change and your requirements might change. So keep that in mind as well. But the biggest thing here is you need a plan. And what does that plan look like? Well, it depends. It's a little bit unique for every individual company or organization trying to comply here. But ultimately, it comes down to, what are you complying with as far as the DPR is concerned? What are your gaps? What does it take to close those gaps? And how long will it take to close those gaps? I will also say that when you read through the DPR, it may seem like a heavy lift, but when you really look into the details and have experts help you look at the details of it, it may not be that difficult to comply with. There may be a number of options where you can kind of separate out what you're doing for Microsoft, put some different controls in place on just the things you're doing there. And there may be other ways to mitigate the risk that Microsoft is looking to mitigate here. So you kind of need advice. You need legal advice. You need to be able to navigate the contracts that Microsoft is undoubtedly providing to you and asking you to sign. So you need to know what you're on the hook for in terms of the contract. You probably also need cybersecurity advice. Not everybody's a cybersecurity expert. You're an expert in the business that you do. And you're probably not also a privacy expert. There are a number of, like I said, about half of the DPR is, privacy related requirements, and just understanding some of the language there, it makes a difference. So you may need expert advice there as well. I talked a little bit about this, but one of the things that you can do is control the scope. Can you drop certain types of data that you would be dealing with and still accomplish your goals? That might be enough to drop you into a different category to where you're back to self-attestation rather than an independent assessment. So keep things like that in mind. Can you use a Microsoft location, physical or logical, depending? Can you make sure that the data exists entirely on Microsoft servers? If that's the case, that may drop a requirement as well. If you can't do those things, maybe you can use a cloud-based tool, Microsoft SharePoint and their, data loss protection or prevention controls. You may be able to kind of box the things that you're doing for Microsoft and their data in a certain way and put controls on them there so that only the people only the people that need to access that and process that data. And ultimately, you're looking to reduce the burden of your requirements. And there are a number of ways that you can do that. Some practical examples. This is one that's near and dear to Kip and I's heart here. One of the requirements is a commercial or enterprise intrusion detection system. For a small company, that is both onerous and ineffective as a security control. The reason I say that is it takes a skilled engineer to implement, tune, to monitor and understand what it's saying. So what I see more often than not in environments, small and large, is that these things sit on the shelf, they do their thing, and everybody ignores them because it's too many false positives. It's something that's not well understood. Essentially, it's a cost without much benefit that goes with it, unless you have the expertise to use it. And I'd also say, remember that the ultimate goal here is mitigating risk, and in doing so in a reasonable way. So there are solutions to detection and other kind of compensating controls that you can put in place to help mitigate that risk, which may be good enough to meet Microsoft's requirements. And some of the alternatives that come to mind are honeypots and honey tokens through like a solution like Thinkst Canary, which makes it very easy to deploy something that looks like a certain type of machine. You have a lot of options to configure that, but it's a dummy machine. And anytime somebody does something with it, interacts with it in any way, you can send alerts. And because it's not real, it's a high likelihood that it's a true positive rather than a false positive. So minimal cost and high value there. Another idea is, some DNS intelligence through a solution like Cisco Umbrella, where it's looking at all the outbound DNS connection requests. So looking for people looking for resources, things looking for resources out on the internet. And the things that are known bad or known suspicious, it can classify and it can block those callbacks so that malware may not be able to phone home. So it's effectively, it may still be in your environment, but now you know where it is and you've blocked its ability to communicate back. So that's a fairly low cost, relatively easy to implement, relatively high value solution. I mentioned a little bit before, you could do something like Microsoft 365 and SharePoint and their data loss prevention controls for a specific Microsoft purpose or for what you're doing for them. And there are a number of other solutions like that as well that you might be able to do that with as well. But keep options like that in mind. You may be able to stand up another environment with relatively easy effort that will meet all of your requirements, and you keep it out of your own network or your own environment. Some other options here are endpoint detection and response. So, your Carbon Black type solutions, your CrowdStrike type solutions, and your managed detection and response solutions, all of which can be outsourced and monitored. You can hire a third party to do it essentially for, 24/7 by 365. So you've always got some sort of coverage. They know how to interact with you when they do detect something. This again is something that you can outsource and not have to worry about it so much, not have to worry about the maintenance of it so much. And another thing you could do would be to have a strong incident response plan and test it frequently through tabletop exercises, through simulations. And to be able to respond quickly to events and show that you can do that is another level of assurance too. Now let's talk about some real world situations. This is some work I've done in the past, and it was a consulting company that had what was deemed highly confidential information at one point by Microsoft. But there was, again, we had the questionnaire that lacked context. So the situation and the resolution ultimately was different than what Microsoft originally proposed. What they wanted essentially bumped this company into a category that required an independent DPR assessment. And I mean, this is a costly assessment, and there were some known gaps that existed. And maybe gaps isn't the right term, but something that may have been okay in the short term that an independent assessment may have found lacking. So there's always that. We think it's okay for right now. We have plans to get better, but a third-party independent assessor may come in and say, no, sorry, that's insufficient. So there's always that question mark too. The reality of this situation was that the highly confidential information in question was related to a single project in the past, so it was completed, that involved pre-release device specifications. And by the time this SSPA, this annual requirement came up, the product had since been released. So it didn't necessarily fit the highly confidential category anymore. So we were able to go back to Microsoft, and the resolution was ultimately that the context was explained in terms of the actual risk. The project itself was fairly limited scope, fairly limited amount of data. So the volume is a little bit of a factor there too. But ultimately, we convinced them that, since this device has been released, this is no longer pre-release materials. This is now mainstream release materials. They agreed to drop to the confidential data category, which dropped the independent assessment requirement and bought some breathing room to close those gaps or those potential shortcomings. So that turned out to be a decent resolution, all considered. Another situation here was with a marketing company that had a long-established relationship with Microsoft, and for years had submitted the SSPA and been fine, had no issues. And then at one point they suddenly turned red and had a little bit of trouble getting information as to why. But basically, somebody that now owned their relationship at Microsoft deemed that they were processing highly confidential data. This had been a change. They hadn't changed what they'd done in terms of their scope, but the perception on the Microsoft side changed. And they then were bumped up into a category requiring an independent DPR assessment. So the reality of this one was the scope was again limited in terms of highly confidential data. It did meet the highly confidential data requirements that Microsoft set forth, but just barely. And so the decision had to be made within the company whether it was worth working with that highly confidential data and the independent DPR assessment, or cease doing that activity. The resolution there was they ultimately decided to pursue the work like they had been, and prepared with a third party for the independent DPR assessment. And they got the assessment back. There were a few things they had to fix, but it wasn't a huge deal, wasn't a huge lift, all considered. So they ended up being coming out in a decent place as well. And with that, I would like to take some questions. Who has questions, comments, concerns, general musings?
If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to put it in the chat room, or we have some time so I can unmute you guys and you guys can ask directly.
Yeah. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so we can have a conversation if folks would like to do so.
Yes.
Thanks, Glenn. Well, no requirement to have questions. Maybe Glenn was just super clear. And I threw a few thoughts into the chat as well as you were going along, Glenn. So I appreciate it. Excuse me. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about this topic. So let me just share my screen and let's keep going. And feel free to put your if you do come up with a question, just go ahead and throw it in the chat there. Hey, Melinda, is my screen coming through all right?
Yes, it is.
Ah, great. Okay, cool. So really appreciate, Glenn, you talking about Microsoft's SSPA program and some of the experiences that you've had with it. It's I think about Jeff again, and Jeff has multiple customers. Microsoft's just one of them. He also has AWS, as you saw, Salesforce, and others, and every one of them has a program like SSPA. And what we found is that actually the requirements overlap quite a bit. So one of the things we've realized is that if you can comply with, say, Microsoft's SSPA, it's not that big of a stretch to also comply with AWS's program, but it still takes a lot of time and energy. And then the other thing that we've also noticed too is that simply complying with a customer's data security demands really isn't enough, because Jeff wasn't just overwhelmed with one customer's requirements. He was overwhelmed with a lot of other things too that he didn't put in the email that we talked about later. Include things like phishing, because he knew people who had been phished out of thousands of dollars because of a financial fraud. He knew about ransomware, so he didn't really understand how all these things worked, but he knew that he had more than just customer issues to deal with. So that's when we start talking with business owners about high-speed, low-drag cybersecurity. A lot of people in Jeff's situation are saying to themselves, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to end up with a program that that consumes tremendous amount of my money and overhead costs and makes us inflexible and slows us down and makes everything harder." And so, over time, as we've worked with people like Jeff, we've realized that what we really need to do is we need to kind of meld all these requirements together. So let me kind of step you through how we do that. And then when I'm done, what I would like to do is share with you a tool that we use so that if you'd like to do it, you can as well. So of course, we've got customer expectations, right? Really, really strong voice in this process. You've also got cyber criminals who are trying to steal from you. Right now, they're stealing about $6 trillion a year worldwide, which is an amazing amount of money. I read the other day that $6 trillion is actually the equivalent of the third largest economy on planet Earth. So it's a stunning amount of money, and it was nothing like that when I first started doing this kind of work. And then regulators, right? So everybody has a regulator, whether it's the Federal Trade Commission or if you're a bank or a credit union. You've got regulators who are overlooking your sector. If you're in healthcare, you've got another regulator. So whoever your regulator is, they're watching you as well. They have requirements for you. So there's this huge balancing act that you need to do. But really, at the end of the day, all Jeff cares about and all we really care about is we want a healthy, growing business, right? That's why we went into business, right? There's benefits for doing well and serving customers well. And and so it's like, well, what do you do with this? Well, what I've noticed a lot of people do is they play whack-a-mole. Things just kind of show up and they just sort of deal with them as they go. They don't do it in a really structured way. And there's a lot of downsides to doing it that way. I mean, on the one hand, it's easy, right? Because something comes in and, and you kind of deal with it, and then you get on, you kind of get back to what you really are in business to do. But there's a lot of downsides. I mean, you end up working harder than you should. There's a lot of duplication of effort, right? So you're spending more than you really need to. And you're probably contradicting yourself to your team members as far as what it is that you want. Because as new things show up, you just start agreeing to things. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples here. And then your folks get confused. That actually increases the chance that you're going to have a cybersecurity incident. And then you end up making all these promises to customers, investors, employees, and it gets really difficult to keep those promises. So here's a couple of excerpts that I thought I'd show you from a couple of real contracts that I've just kind of redacted, right, the information from where they came from. But these were two very, very large insurance companies, and one of our customers was a fintech who was selling services to these large insurance companies. And, here's just one example. I've got huge spreadsheets full of all kinds of examples. It was actually one of the tough things to do here to get ready for today, was to decide what I was going to share with you. But this one I think is pretty simple, right? So insurance company number one says, hey, if you have a data breach, we want to hear about that within 48 hours. And then company number two is like, no, we really think 24 hours is the right way to go. And so, I just want to, pose the question, if you had already agreed to customer number one's 48 hours requirement and you had operationalized it, well, what would you do when insurance company number two came along? And is 24 hours even reasonable? Quite honestly, I don't think it's reasonable. I don't even think 48 hours is reasonable. I think reasonable is probably in the 72-hour range. And that's what I advocate for. But how do you balance all this stuff, especially if you've operationalized something? Let's take a look at another example. Where on password requirements. Let's just talk about that. So another real world example here, where two insurance companies said, this is what you need to do for passwords. Small fintech company, and I've highlighted just one thing that's different between them, right? One wanted 90 days, changing passwords every 90 days. One of them wanted them to be changed every 60 days. And if you look at some of the other requirements, I mean, this is positively Stone Age compared to what the best practice recommendations are today from the National Institute of Science and Technology, or NIST. So these guys are way behind the curve as far as, what is a good password anyway, and they're not even on the same page. And in the case of my fintech, it was even worse, because guess what? They had already gone to passphrases, and according to passphrase best practices, you shouldn't be changing your passphrases as long as they meet the requirements, right? 12 to 20 characters in total, minimum of 3 random words. If you're doing that, then you shouldn't be changing them at all, because there's a human factor aspect to this, which is you want passphrases to be easy for people to remember, but hard for computers to guess. And so how do you reconcile all this, right? There's a few ways that you could play this, and I've seen people again play whack-a-mole a lot when they are faced with these things popping up all over the place. You could just smile and say, sure, we'll change our passphrases every 90 days, and then sure, we'll change them every 60 days. And I see that a lot, where people just kind of sign the contract and they really don't try to operationalize anything. And as Glenn pointed out, if something bad does happen, you're going to be on the hook. So really not a great way to go to make contractual promises that you don't actually fulfill. So one of the more powerful ways, I think, to create a cybersecurity program that is high speed, low drag is using an approach that I call secure once, comply many. And this is a visualization that I use with customers to help them understand what I mean by that. And very simply, on the left is a circle that kind of documents all the different things that are pressing down on you, right? So I've talked about what those are. And then on the right is just a single distilled set of standards, processes, and procedures that you make for your workforce. So they don't have to ever think about where did these requirements come from, and should I do a 90-day passphrase reset or a 60-day passphrase reset? You get that all away from your workforce, and so now what I want to do is actually show you how I do this kind of work. So first of all, I keep a master spreadsheet of all of our customer data security requirements. So this is just customers, to the extent that we have regulatory requirements and to the extent that we have to do other things to stay, to stay out of trouble with phishing and ransomware, right? I've got other spreadsheets with those requirements, but I just want to focus on the customer stuff right now. And you can see here that I not only have I numbered each requirement uniquely, and by the way, these are real requirements from 4 real customers, but I've actually mapped them, right? So I can tell that customer A and customer B are actually asking for the same thing or very, very similar to the same thing. So I can keep track of that. So I don't have 2 requirements there from 2 customers. I actually have 1 requirement. And then you can see here where I've got another case where customer B and customer C were also asking for essentially the same thing using completely different language, right? So there's a lot of analysis that you've got to bring to bear in this. And then guess what? There's all 4 customers actually have some unique things that they're looking for as well, right? So here's a handful of stuff that is not overlapping between what these customers want, and so these are unique. Now I take all this stuff, and as I showed in the secure once, comply many visual that I put on the screen a few moments ago, all this stuff is feeding into our internal security policy. Now, when a new contract comes in, I'm comparing what they want with the things that we've already agreed to do with our customers. And then what I'm doing is I'm working with our sales team to negotiate any new requirements so that they fit into what we're already doing, like the passphrase versus password issue, right? So if we can get the customer to drop their requirement for passwords and passwords that are minimum of 8 characters and all that stuff, we can get them to drop that and insert the language for passphrases that we're already doing, then that just simplifies everything. I don't even have to tell anybody that we just signed a new agreement because they're already doing the right thing. Now, sometimes I get into an impasse, right, where I'm saying a commercial intrusion detection system doesn't make sense for us. We're not big enough for that. So we're not going to do that, and that can cause some real trouble with the security team on our customer side. And so when that happens, when we get into an impasse, what I'll do typically is I'll reach out to the internal champion that we have at our customer. And that is generally the person who really wants to buy our service. And they're not a cybersecurity person. They're not on the cybersecurity team. And so I see them as leverage, right? As somebody that I can go to and I can say, hey, we'd really like to serve you, but we're getting blocked by your security team. And that's generally a very effective approach. Okay, so there's another thing you have to pay attention here too, which is you need to have the right size security program. It's really not going to be all that helpful if you're going to, if you're a small fintech and you're trying to adopt giant enterprise solutions to some of your technology problems. Even mid-sized companies struggle to do that. So you want to get you want to make a good fitting program. And I see people struggle with this all the time. And you end up with situations, right, where you've got a kid wearing his dad's suit to go to a formal event, which obviously, it doesn't work. It doesn't look right. No amount of cuffing the pants or or even putting a little thread and needle into the situation is gonna change this, right? It's just, he's just not big enough, all right, to fill out this suit. And it can be the other way around too. Like you could be a mid-sized company wearing, the equivalent of biker shorts to a fancy dinner. That's not going to work either. And don't worry, I'm not going to show you that picture. But but you need a baby bear program, right? You need something that's not too big, not too small, something that's just right for you. And I'm going to talk about how to do that in a moment too. Oh, by the way, speaking of biker shorts, I was looking around for a visualization for, for what do I think about when I think about high speed, low drag, and I think this is a wonderful visualization for that. And I don't know if you've seen this before, but a lot of competitive cyclists are starting to kind of dabble in very unorthodox ways of cutting down wind resistance. So this looks really weird to somebody who's never seen it before, and you might think that this person is just trying to showboat or cheat. Who knows, right? But I really like this visualization because I think it really strikes to the heart of what it is that I believe that we should be doing. We want nimble programs that are aerodynamic and innovative, and all for a reasonable cost. So anyway, so hopefully that visualization kind of helps you understand a little bit better what I think it is that we need to do. So the secret to solving Jeff's problem in terms of getting a program that's the right size is to take a minimum viable approach. Now, I stole minimum viable shamelessly from the startup community. They talk about minimum viable all the time. And the idea is you just create enough structure to reduce your risks to an acceptable level, but nothing more, right? You're not trying to build a Cadillac solution for a company that can only afford a Honda type of solution, right? And so you push back on requirements that are unreasonable for a company of your size. I thought Glen did a great job of highlighting the commercial intrusion detection system that is required, but really just makes no sense at all for small and mid-sized companies. And I also thought Glen did a great job of talking about how you can reimagine, right? How you might be able to satisfy requirements, but maybe in a different way than what your customer was originally thinking. Lower cost alternatives. One of the things that I do sometimes is I just push back and say, well, look, at the price point that we're selling this solution for, we can't do a commercial grade intrusion detection system. We can't participate with you on a multi-day disaster recovery scenario. Like, we can't afford to do that. But if you'd like to pay us to do those things, if these requirements are that important to you, then that would be fine. We'll let you pay for it. And believe it or not, we've actually had some companies say, okay, great, we'll go ahead and pay for that. But most of the time, most of the customers just say, okay, never mind, forget we brought it up. So, and as I said, there's also the issue of ransomware, phishing, things like that, internal threats. And this is something that people don't understand, which is customer programs like SSPA, contractual addendum. They don't really help companies protect proprietary information, payroll data, or any of those things. And they're not going to, because these programs are going to look out for the customer's interests. So we took all these requirements, and we were putting together a secure once, comply many approach for Jeff. And so this was the cyber risk management action plan that we made for him here on the screen. I'm just showing you the top 10 items. There was actually more than 10, but just showing you the top 10 here. And just to give you an idea of what we helped Jeff with. Well, the first thing is Jeff doesn't really know anything about cybersecurity or cyber risk management. So we said, hey, read part 1 of Kip's book, Fire Doesn't Innovate, because it was written specifically for a person such as yourself who doesn't really want to know all the details, but does need to know, how should I be thinking about this as a business risk? Because that's what it's really become. The second thing is, we said you really need a great cyber liability insurance policy that's gonna cover you in the case of things like financial fraud. If you need digital forensics, but you don't know who to call to get digital forensics, you can get that from your insurance carrier. Items 3 and 4 really came straight out of a need to comply with Microsoft's program. So we've got a template for a cyber risk operations manual that contains all the the right things to do. Same with a privacy policy. He didn't have a disaster recovery program, but he felt like he really needed to. So we provided a template to him and helped him get that template customized for his situation. He wasn't asking his staff to sign an acceptable use agreement, so we got him one of those. Then we helped him secure all his financial online accounts, which is super important. And then LastPass, we recommended LastPass. There's more than one way to go. LastPass isn't the only choice, but that seemed to work for him. So anyway, just wanted you to actually see what a cyber risk management action plan really looks like. And you might be surprised, right, that that some of these mitigations that we're recommending are very simple and honestly kind of boring, to be honest with you. But I'm going to give you a template today that's going to let you do this. Now, businesses are typically either large, medium, or small in size and sophistication. We actually have 3 different templates, one for each size. And today, just to keep things simple, what we'd like to do is share with you our small company template. I don't know if you're in a small company or not. You might be in a giant enterprise, but I still think there's probably going to be some value here for you. And so it's really 3 easy steps. You do the customer self-assessment, that's in the template. You identify your top risks, and then you devise mitigations and prioritize them. Very straightforward. But what's helpful is that our self-assessment has questions in it that are going to help you actually uncover what your top cyber risks are. And again, this is a template that we use with our customers all the time. The template has 3 tabs. It's actually a Google sheet. It's got 3 tabs. The first tab is about assets, and you can see here that we pre-filled a whole bunch of possible assets that any small company would have. And you can take out the ones that you don't have. You can replace them with ones that perhaps we've overlooked, and then we suggest that you put them in a prioritized order. So that's why we've got a column in there for that. We've got a second tab, which is really about cyber risk and asking questions about things like, do you have a standard vendor contract? And the idea there is that, you should be telling your vendors what you expect of them when it comes to cyber risk management. So we've got some pretty standard cyber risk questions in there. And then tab number 3 is about cyber hygiene. So what are the most common ways to mitigate the more common threats that we face today? So when we did this for Jeff, we came up with these 4 top cyber risks for him. And it's stuff that we've really talked about all the way along today. So no surprise, right? Kind of boring, actually, but not for Jeff, right? Because for Jeff, he's just like, I don't even know where to begin. And he's just looking at that next mole that has just popped up out of the ground at him. So given that those were his 4 top cyber risks, again, these were the 10 mitigations that we came up with in the order that we came up with them for him. So okay, so that's what I wanted to share, right? Is just to recap for a moment, is this whole idea that complying with customer security demands is really important, obviously, because you need to keep that customer's business, or you want to land that customer's business. But it's really not the end of the story. You need to actually have a cybersecurity program that's going to help you meet those requirements. They're also going to help you satisfy other risks that you have that your customers aren't paying any attention to at all. And you need to kind of put it all together in a way that it's going to be like a really well-fitting set of gloves, right? So anyway, so there you go. We've got time for some Q&A. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to hear them. I'd love to provide you with some answers, and invite Glen to do that as well. And then after we do some Q&A, we'll talk a little bit more about if you'd like to try the template that we have for discovering top cyber risks. Be happy to talk a little bit about that as well. So, okay, so I'm looking in the chat here. Oh, how interesting, Ted. So Ted says LastPass has NUMAS trackers in its Android app. I'm definitely going to have to go look at that. Oh, then that looks brand new as well.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Excellent. That is really good to know. I know LastPass has gone through a bunch of changes lately because of their acquisition by, I think it was LogMeIn. Somebody correct me if I didn't get that right. So and they just did a pricing change as well. So okay. Yeah, LogMeIn, says Ted. Yep. And I remember, I haven't used LogMeIn, but I remember that when that happened, there were a lot of people that I knew who had used LogMeIn, and they just started rolling their eyes, at like, oh my God, how are they gonna, trash this LastPass product? They just didn't have a good experience working with LogMeIn. And I guess we're starting to see that now, aren't we? With the way they're managing that product. Geez, that's too bad. Okay. Okay. Well, if there aren't any questions, let's go ahead and roll on over to, this template that we have that we're happy to share with you and help you find your top cyber risks. Now, not only am I happy to give you the template, but after you fill out the template, and it should only take about an hour, unless you really want to go deep. But if you just want to spend an hour, that should be plenty of time to get some good value from this. So, so if you want to try our template, be happy to share it with you. And then I'm even willing to do a one-on-one appointment with you after you fill it out to help you go through it, help you identify what the top cyber risks are for you. Maybe you have some questions about the questions that we're asking, and I'd be happy to to go through that as well. And then you can create your own cyber risk management action plan. So if you'd like to do that, then all you need to do is just send a message in the chat to Melinda, or if you want to send her an email after we after we wrap up here today, then she'll get you all set up. So no cost, no obligation. Just want to share with you guys something that seems to be working really well for our customers. Thought it might work really well for you. So, all right. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. So, Glenn, any final words?
No, I think we've kind of covered it. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. There's numerous ways to comply. Secure once, comply many times. So,
yep. Definitely. Okay, thanks, Melinda, for putting your email address in the chat. If anybody wants to reach out to Melinda directly, feel free to reach out to me as well. You know my email address, and I'm always reading the messages that you send me. I really appreciate and enjoy hearing from you. Okay, well, looks like we wrapped up on time. I really appreciate the fact that you were here. Thanks so much for dropping in. Let us know how we can help you in the future, and we'll go ahead and sign off for now. Thanks, everybody.